time we head out to New Salem, North Dakota. We visit with Spencer Wirt, the Meat Dude, brought to you by All Soccer Meats. And I finally get to tell you a little bit more about some developments with All Soccer Meats. Other people jumping the gun a little bit. I got the details. I'll share it with you, but I want to visit with my friend and take your questions. All things meat related. Cuts, rubs, cooking techniques, all of it at 35270. Spencer, how you been, man?
Cold like everybody else, but doing good.
Yeah, it's not going to warm up for a little while now, but I was visiting with somebody in a warmer state earlier today, and when I said, you know what, normally by this time 2 degrees is not a big deal. Actually, 2 degrees is pleasant because we're so used to how cold it's been up until this point. So I think we've been spoiled, and that's why it feels so much colder right now than what we're used to this time of year. Just my opinion. I'm not a meteorologist. I just go with my memory, which sometimes doesn't serve me all that good. I have a lot of questions that have been waiting for you for like 24 hours. You want to dive on in?
Let's do it.
All right. Tyler, question for the Meat Dude. The top end of a spare rib bone has cartilage, which is not chewable. Why don't butchers cut that part off?
Well, here's a fun fact. It's actually at the bottom end. The cartilage would be closest to the bottom of the belly of the pig. So there's just a little side note. I don't. So like when we process pigs, which I'm actually cutting pigs today, which only happens once a month, but we only do hogs and lambs once a month. Side note. We
That's
do.
That's 2 side notes. You don't get 3 of them.
Too many side notes. I can't say that anymore, can I? That's like rules of radio. Okay.
There's rules? Nobody's told me that. So. This is 6 years. I didn't know there's rules to this thing. All right, back to the side note 1. It's at the bottom of there. Side note 2, Spencer Wirt cuts up hogs once a month.
Yeah. Okay.
Why is it not?
So
why is it not cut off?
it comes to a question of using a saw or a knife, right? If you're just trying to do knife work, so you're a retail shop and you get in a package of spare ribs and you want to trim them up, make them presentable, you don't set the bandsaw up, you don't have a bandsaw, what have you. You're just going to take a knife, and that knife can cut through that cartilage. And in the bottom of the spare ribs is the sternum, and that sternum is cut off, usually at the cartilage juncture between the ribs and the sternum, and that's why that little bit of cartilage is left behind. The other method would be to throw it on a bandsaw and cut through the bone so that you completely remove all that cartilage. But if you're talking on a yield basis, when you're selling by the pound, you're going to want to leave a little bit of extra poundage on that spare rib. Plus, in my opinion, the meat is all skirt steak that's surrounding that piece of cartilage, and that's like the best part of the spare rib. But you do have to be cautious while chewing through it, or else you'll get that little chunk of cartilage in there and you don't even realize you're chewing on it until you hit that sensitive spot in your teeth.
Yeah, and then when you're out at the restaurant, you got to dig in and pull it out in front of everybody to see. Is not very ideal. That's one thing. There are some spots where I love the ribs. I love the smoking technique that they have. I like sometimes the barbecue sauce, even the dry ribs, depending on where I'm at. And it seems more and more that cartilage is taking up more of that rack of rib, whether the half rack, full rack. I mean, is that just because, as you say, it's about the poundage, and that's what these?
Well, it depends on which end of the spare rib that the rib section you received on your plate came from. Further back in the belly rib section, and there's more cartilage. Moving up forward, once you get into that sternum location, there's more bone versus cartilage. So it really just depends, if you're getting a rack of ribs or a half rack or whatever. It really just depends the luck of the draw if you get the back end or the front end of the rack of spare ribs.
You know what? This is a real in-the-moment thought that I'm going to take for a walk here, because there are some restaurants where you can do a sampler. They might have 3 or 4 different variety of ribs. So I want a sample platter of your ribs. And those individually cut are the best rib of the restaurant. But if I go and I get to that same restaurant and do a half rack of ribs, I always get what you're talking about here. Somebody's planning that in the back in the actual kitchen is what I'm guessing. And so I'm just throwing that out there. If I want to do this, it's the sample size because those seem to be the ones that they were wanting to make sure that are presentable, and it's the full serving of a rib. You don't have to comment on it. That's just an observation that came right now to me.
Well, the comment that I will have is that, if you look at it on the restaurant or retail side of things, is that they had to pay for that whole rack of ribs, so they got to utilize it somehow. Unfortunately, there is those 3 to 4 ribs that come out of a spare rib rack that there is a lot of cartilage on it, but it's still good meat on it. It's just not the greatest eating experience compared to the other 6 or 7 further up on the rack. So,
all right. Hey,
waste not, want not.
Yeah,
right?
Thanks for coming to the aid and the defense of the restaurants out there. I'm sure they were not taking kindly.
I'm on their side.
I know.
Retailers, restaurant, that's my side.
Yeah,
man.
I know. Stick up for your crowd. I'll stick up for the average Joe out there. That's fine. Tyler, ask the meat dude if cattle butchered in winter have a bigger fat layer than in the summer.
No, I wouldn't say. If anything, it's harder to get cattle finished during, well, right now, for instance, because they have to use so much energy just to stay alive, right? Because cattle putting on fat is energy, and that's energy that's not needed to be utilized right away by the body, so then it gets deposited as fat. So during winter, if it's super, super cold, they need to take a lot more energy in just to keep moving around and staying warm. Where like springtime, fall time, where it's that perfect, probably 30 to 50 degrees, that's when they're going to be being able to put that energy into fat depositing instead of just body maintenance.
Well, now we know. Tyler, tell Spencer I did your beef brisket recipe. You may know what you're talking about, LOL. So that's a backhanded compliment from a number that I recognize coming in. Tyler, tell Spencer I cut the cartilage off when I smoke and keep it as a chef's snack, as it is the best meat. So there, you're getting some back.
Hey, sometimes, it is nice when texters come in and say that I do know what I'm talking about. Because, what's fun about the show is what I've always said is, this is not prepped whatsoever. This is all shooting from the hip. So It's kind of fun to know that I'm not just making stuff up.
Mm-hmm. I would not know what that's like. I don't get the compliments. I get the cheap shots most of the time, but that's a different story. That's me whining already. Tyler, question for the meat dude. What is the process of aging meat?
Aging meat is just letting it sit in a refrigerated, usually low humidity environment, and letting meat do its natural thing. So we harvest a beef or slaughter a beef, whatever you want to call it, goes into the cooler, and during the first initial 24 hours, we have a decrease in temperature, rigor mortis occurs, we have a decline in pH. Once that meat gets below 45 degrees Fahrenheit, it's stable, right? But there's enzymes in the meat that are still active and still looking for places to go and energy to burn per se, but there obviously isn't any energy to burn because it's meat. So what that does is that enzymes keep on burning up, and while doing that, they tenderize the meat. That process lasts, on beef, for instance, about 10 days. So we hang our carcasses on a 2-week rotation. After about 10 days, the enzyme breakdown of the proteins, the tenderization of the aging process is done. And then we have a process called dry aging that kind of takes over. And all dry aging does is removes moisture from the meat. And by removing moisture and drying the product out, hence dry aging, it enhances the flavor and creates a more potent flavor. So that's why in restaurants you see, dry aged steaks for at least a ridiculous amount of days. It creates just a richer, fuller flavor. But on the back end, you lose a lot of weight, you lose a lot of product due to the drying out of the moisture content, and that's why that product is so expensive.
During that process, there's not much that a guy does, though, right? I mean, you put it in your environment, and then you just let her rest.
Yep.
Okay. That sounds like something I could get behind, aside from the whole being patient part. I see people.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to do it in your fridge, right? Because your fridge is not a controlled environment, even though you're controlling temperature, but you're opening it and closing it so many times that the humidity is so back and forth that that's not a great environment to truly dry age. You can wet age in your fridge, which would be vacuum sealing the product and putting it into your fridge and just letting it sit in there for a week. Now, you're not going to get the dry aging effect through that, but you still, for instance, if you bought a rib loin at the store that was 4 or 5 days from harvest, you left it vac packed, you put it in your fridge for another 10 days, there will be some tenderization that still occurs on the back end of that. That would be considered wet aging. So yeah, those are the two types: wet aging, dry aging.
Which one do you prefer? Like, which one at the end product you say that is what I'm talking about?
You know, it kind of depends. Obviously, my wheelhouse and what we do and what most small plants that slaughter and process, the niche that we're getting with our process compared to the large facilities that slaughter and process animals is the dry aging effect. That is why you hear people say that our beef tastes so much different than product in the grocery store, because product in the grocery store is wet aged, right? Now, there's a place for both. Dry aging isn't really if you're trying to create a business where you're buying hundreds of cattle, putting it through a facility, dry aging whole carcasses, and then selling the product at the end, it just doesn't work. So there's a place for both. As long as that first initial enzyme breakdown can occur, whether that's in a vacuum packaged bag or hanging as a carcass, what happens after that is just an added bonus.
I don't see anywhere. You always talk about marketing when it comes to, the way of which we describe some certain cuts. Well, you give them cute nicknames. I don't know that I've ever seen anywhere saying our wet-aged steaks are on sale, for example. So I think that was probably the answer without having to ask the question as far as the marketing aspect goes. Because it's something about saying, yeah, this is wet-aged, doesn't really work up my appetite.
No, but aged does, right?
Yeah.
Just leave out whether it's wet or dry, and you can just stick an aged, 30-day aged or whatever, and then it works.
I assume this question comes in jest, but I'm going to read it anyway in case maybe you got an answer. Meat Dude, what's the shelf life of fresh Rocky Mountain oysters in the fridge?
I don't know. You should leave it in your fridge, and once it starts stinking, text back in and let us know how long it lasted.
Yeah, just tally it off on your calendar and report back when saying, you know what, I would not eat that Rocky Mountain oyster, whether that's day 1 or day 11. I have no idea what the lifespan is either. One more question before I let you go. This one comes in. So we can buy meat from the grocery store and take it out of the bag and dry it? Is the question.
Yeah, for sure. Now, once a steak is cut into an individual steak, I wouldn't recommend doing that process. So let's say you have, a large chunk of meat like a chuck roast or a rib loin or a strip loin, like I already referred to. You can definitely continue to dry age that product if you have an environment that is controlled. Again, that is the key. Refrigerator, just leaving it out open in your refrigerator, not a good idea. But if you have, like everybody has in their kitchen, right, a controlled environment refrigeration unit.
Yeah. Who doesn't have one of those?
You could do that then. Yeah.
Okay, a lot. I got
look at the rest. Look at what restaurants do that dry age their steaks. They bring it in off the truck in large boxes. That's everything's back packaged, and then they pull it out of the package, set it on a shelf in a humidity controlled environment, and then they age it to their standards, and that's how it works.
One quick question. Okay, lad. This is the last one, though. I guarantee it. How long should you let a beef hang in a cooler?
How long should you?
How long should you let a beef hang in the cooler?
I still think a 2-week rotation is plenty of time, and I know a lot of old school guys that probably argue that it should be 21 plus. I just don't think your benefit, the benefits received by hanging it over 14 days are not worth the product loss, if that makes sense.
Perfect sense.
So you can look at it two ways, on a business side of things or on a personal side of things. If it's your personal beef, you do whatever you want. wait till the mold starts showing up. Have more power to you. But in a business setting, I think 14 is kind of the ticket. You get the aging, you get the enhanced flavor, but you don't lose too much weight.
Mm-hmm.
You don't lose too much product due to the dry aging effect.
Very informative check-in this week, Spence. I appreciate it. We'll do this again next Thursday, all right?
Sounds great.
All right, take care. Spencer Wirt's the Meat Dude. This conversation brought to you by All Sagar Meats. Open right now in Audubon, Minnesota. Soon to be open on Veterans right here in Fargo. I'll tell you more details after KFGO News.